tell me a little bit about your time as the Detective Chief Inspector of the Met Police.
Yes, so my background before working in anti-bullying was in the Metropolitan Police. When we are teens and preteens, it's very difficult to see the world that way.
Yeah.
The world is smaller. It is about those people that are either in our online world or in our face-to-face world, but it's very, very small.
It's such a good point. We have these adult ideas and we're like, this will work with young people. And then as soon as we apply, we're like, actually, they live a very different life to us. Their context is much smaller. They refer to kind of understand their own existence is much more constricted than what we've got, right? I don't think that we can eradicate bullying. I think it's impossible to eradicate bullying entirely. I think it's part of the human experience. I think that it's a horrible part of the human experience.
I'd love to say, in a perfect world, it wouldn't exist. I think we are headed toward the world where there is more awareness of it. And I think with more awareness, it gives us the power to make more of an impact and affect more change.
Welcome to the Warrior Academy podcast.
Hiya.
Lucy, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, could you give me just a brief introduction?
So hi everyone, my name is Lucy Howard. I work for an anti-bullying charity called Bullies Out, and we are based over in the UK. I've worked with them for about 5 years now, and my passion is the online world and keeping children safe online, but not only keeping them safe online, but looking about how we use that online world in the best possible ways, because it's there, it's not going away. So how can we help them to make the most of it?
Brilliant. Yeah, it's so interesting because it's something that I totally agree with. I look at what we do as a martial arts organization, a character development organization that leverages martial arts, right? And I see our responsibility to teach young people to protect themselves. But we're rarely going to be attacked physically nowadays, or at least less likely. The attacks do continue, but they're more digitally based, right? And so it'd be fascinating to talk with you about the difference between what young people are experiencing when it comes to the kind of attacks and the self-defense aspect of how they can, be situationally aware, what they can do to look after themselves and so on. I think that'd be a really interesting topic to get into. Before we do, tell me a little bit about your time as the Detective Chief Inspector of the Met Police.
Yes, so my background before working in anti-bullying was in the Metropolitan Police, and yes, I left there. I was Detective Chief Inspector working in we call it Director of Professional Standards. So yeah, loved it. Very, very exciting times. Quite different to what I'm doing now, but yes, learned a lot. Yeah.
How long were you the Detective Chief Inspector there?
So I joined the police back in 2002, and progressed my way up through the ranks, and left as a detective chief inspector, took a career break, and actually went out to live in Chile for a bit, and then came back.
It's a bit of a change, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's amazing when you take time out and actually sort of have a think about who you are. And I think the police, you very much feel you are your profession, you are your career. And actually when I took a step back from it and actually had time to think about what my values were and what mattered to me, I saw sort of protecting people was still there and keeping people safe was still there, but actually maybe there were other ways I could go about doing that. And that sort of led me towards the anti-bullying world and the work I do there, because actually it's still there. It's still about protecting people and keeping people safe, but it's about accessing them in a bit of a different way.
So that kind of moment of pause gave you some time for kind of introspective work and really looking at the future, where you want to be and what you want to do and what you want to contribute towards, right?
It's I think, in a perfect world, we'd all have that time, wouldn't we? But actually, I've done some work in and mentoring with people who are looking at making career changes, and it's really lovely speaking to people about when they've sat and thought about actually what do I want to do now? 10, 15 years into a career, and we don't have to. That doesn't define us. You know,
No.
there's much more to us, and actually sometimes having the time out to sit and challenge ourselves, or having someone there that might provide that challenge. So, you know, mentoring or coaching, or, you know, access to somebody who might give us that little challenge or push us to think, well, actually, what bit of what I'm doing is the bit that matters to me? What bit of what I'm doing is my values, and where else could I find that? And yeah, I was very lucky.
Interesting, isn't it? Because I've got a lot of friends and family who are military, and it's similar sort of stuff, right? I mean, you can spend 40 years in the military and you can actually become quite institutionalized, and then it's very difficult to leave. The pension gets bigger, and you know, there's more of a reason to stay, and it's actually then quite nerve-wracking when you think about life on City Street outside of being in the military, where you've got that camaraderie, you've got that understanding of your, you know, who you are and what you do, and that identity so linked with you as a person, right? And so I can completely understand that. But it's interesting when I mentor business owners who go through a similar pivot, whether it's from government jobs or from corporate life into then creating their own businesses. It's really interesting because, you know, they're like, well, what is my purpose? What should I be doing? And I always say to them, you know, you can search for your purpose, but it's one of those things that actually finds you. The more digging you do, sometimes the harder it is. You just need a moment to kind of pause and then look at what you enjoy. You know, you look at, do you enjoy it? Can you get paid for it? And can you make an impact with it? It's like a mixture of these things come together to then give you that opportunity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a bit of a personal question here. You've obviously dedicated the last 4 or 5 years to bullying and to working with young people on bullying. Were you bullied as a child?
So I get asked that a lot, actually, and no, I wasn't. So this is not a personal crusade. I know a lot of people in the anti-bullying world, there's that personal aspect. For me, I think it was born out of my value set firmly, and I think it comes from probably my background in the police as well. But I believe in fairness, and you know, as a parent myself, I just see that, you know, that there's so much out there that we can do to help, and I just feel very passionately about helping others through. You know, I wasn't bullied, but I know how it feels to feel alone or to feel excluded or left out. We all do. We've all had times where, you know, the world has felt unfair to us. And when we are bullied, we feel at our most vulnerable. And we all know how that can feel. You know, we've all had moments where we felt vulnerable. So there's nothing to stop us being there to help and support somebody else through a time when they are their most vulnerable. And I think that's what, you know, charities like Bullies Out do for people. They provide that outlet for, you know, if a child is being bullied, you know, maybe they don't want to go to a parent or to someone they know, but, you know, through charities like Bullies Out, they can access a bit of support, a bit of guidance, someone just to be there for them so that they know they're not alone. So that's what I love about it for me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a really virtuous mission, right? To try and seek fairness and justice, and to provide that for young people when they feel alone. And I think that's so typical, right, for young people to experience. In fact, I think the majority of people go through bullying. What's interesting as well is I think that a lot of people actually become bullies, you know, whether it's because of the bullying they go through or not. But a lot of people actually look back and think, once they've done a bit of introspective work, actually, I was a bully to that person, or, you know, within that individual context. Were you ever a bully when you were a child?
So again, I think we all, and I would challenge that, you know, you or to anyone listening, I think we are all capable of displaying bullying behavior. It doesn't make us a bully. And, you know, we believe firmly at Bullies Out there, you know, it's not about labels. You know, anyone is capable of changing their behavior. And, you know, when we go into schools, and I'll say, you know, you are capable of waking up tomorrow and deciding on the person you want to be. And, you know, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past, because, you know, we'll all, you know, we as adults, I mean, if you think about in the workplace, when we are, you know, under a deadline, or we're feeling pressured, or we've had a row at home, we're all capable of not thinking about how our actions might come across to others, and displaying what others might perceive as bullying behavior. But that doesn't make us a bully. But as you were saying there, what we also see is that if people come across that sort of behavior, especially at a young age, so if you look at that sort of key stage 1 demographic, if they are seeing that sort of bullying behavior, what's really important is that we catch that, and instead of seeing them mirror that behavior, we encourage them to show kindness, so that actually we subvert it, and the person displaying the bullying behavior starts to mirror that kindness instead. Because if they start to see that, okay, I'm being mean to someone, but actually they're just showing me kindness in return, they start to trust you, don't they? And think, well, actually, maybe I don't need to keep being mean. Maybe actually, maybe I can trust this person. Maybe I can let them in. Because if we're looking at little kids, but no one's born a bully, so we can work with them, we can help them, we can perform interventions and actually help them change that behavior and stop that bullying cycle right there.
I think that's such a brilliant way of looking at it. I think that so many schools get it wrong, right? And they, especially when there's, if you go to Dubai, it's quite different to the UK, and you've got so many different cultures influencing what's going on. They've all got very different approaches, and so labels are something I've really battled with over here in trying to dissuade people from using labels, even parents. I would say more parents than schools, but a lot of it is, when you speak to a child, if you give them a label, they grow into that, right? It's like you're painting a picture for what they're going to become. And I would often say the same thing as you: bullies aren't bad people. It's typically this flow of negative energy. When I look at why bullying occurs, it's typically because the bully is trying to regain some control in their life. That's the biggest reason I typically see. Obviously, there's aspects of that they're modeling poor behavior, but they're modeling that in order to get control. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. I mean, if you think about it, the way we sort of try and explain it to the kids is, happy people aren't mean. Happy people aren't bullying. It's there's something, when you look at all the vast and varying reasons that people might bully, actually what's hardest for people to sort of get their head around is that it's not personal, it's not about them.
Yeah.
It actually all comes from within, an insecurity or a vulnerability that the person displaying the bullying behavior is feeling. And actually you just, it could be as simple as you are the unfortunate person that happens to be there at the time. It could be that something you're doing or an action that they're seeing is exacerbating that insecurity or that vulnerability, but it's not about you. And that is such a hard thing to get your head around, because it feels so personal, doesn't it? It feels so targeted, because more often than not, they pick up on that one thing that we feel so self-conscious about or so vulnerable about, and they use it to put us down. So of course it feels personal. And that's why for children and for adults, it's very hard to open up about, because they've got us where it hurts us most. So we go in on ourselves and we don't want to tell anyone. And actually, it's when we need that support the most. And hopefully that's what we can, people like you and I can do and make a difference with.
Yeah, definitely. There's probably this protective energy, right? When a bully is bullying, it's typically because they are, it's almost like a form of self-defense from them. They're protecting some sort of insecurity that's been triggered by targeting an insecurity of someone else. And so it's interesting when people say, happy people don't bully. I would agree with that, but it's like happiness for me is just like a fleeting emotion. It's something we experience. It comes and goes. You might be happy for a little bit, then it goes again. And so I wonder if it's more to do with secure people don't bully, right? And as we get older, lack of insecurity is kind of linked very much to fulfillment in life, rather than happiness. It's more understanding how unique we are and why we're unique and how we're different, and then owning those traits. One of the things I always say is, it's hard to be bullied if you own and love the traits about yourself, every trait about yourself, right? So if you're really tall or really short or overweight or skinny, whatever it is, and you don't own or love that about yourself, that's going to be something a bully can just be like, oh, there it is, that's what I'm going for, and you'll feel bullied straight away. Do you know what I mean? Whereas someone who owns and loves that about themselves, it's very hard to attack them on that, because they've got this kind of acceptance, and then they're not as reactive emotionally about that.
I think it's also challenging because when you look at particularly teenagers and preteens, we want to be encouraging them to love themselves and to love everything about them and to embrace their uniqueness. And as adults, I think we're able to see we've come through that. We've come through to where we are in life, and we can see there is a big wide world out there full of people that they haven't even met yet, and that one day they will be so happy to be unique and to be different and to be who they are. When we are teens and preteens, it's very difficult to see the world that way.
Yeah.
The world is smaller. You know, it is about those people that are either in our online world or in our face-to-face world, but it's very, very small. And it's all about wanting to be the same and to fit in. And so it's about when we are trying to help them and support them, it's about how do we make that message realistic for them? Because just sitting saying, embrace your uniqueness, actually to some teens that doesn't help them, and actually it just sets us apart, and they think, well, you don't understand what I'm going through, you have no idea how hard this is for me, I don't want to embrace my uniqueness, I just want to fit in. And so we somehow have to balance our adult perceptions of where they're going to get to with where they are now, and making sure that what we're giving them is relevant to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's such a good point. We have these adult ideas, and we're like, this will work with young people. And then as soon as we apply, we're like, actually, they live a very different life to us. Their context is much smaller. You know, their kind of focal points, if you like, is very, very different. What they refer to kind of understand their own existence is much more constricted than what we've got, right? And interesting there is, I've got this little exercise I do with young people if they are, trying to understand their unique traits. And one of them is you literally just have two young people sit down next to each other and write down the things that they love about the person opposite them that makes them unique. And it's one of those things that, when they then read it, they're like, I didn't even know that was unique about me. So they're starting to realize there's power in being unique, but also that's something that within my small context of awareness that people are noticing, which then becomes a strength, right?
Yeah.
And it could be minor things like you're good at this skill, or, I like this about you, or whatever it is, right? Or I like the way that you do this, or do you know what I mean? But it's little things like that, which I think go a long way to help. And they make the kind of the awareness more realistic for them in a lot of ways, less of an adult thing and more of like a child's perspective, if you like.
That's a really lovely exercise. I bet you see some really lovely comments, and I can imagine that really brings them together. Must be quite empowering.
Yeah, it's very empowering, right? And I think that's a big part of it, is trying to develop that kind of sense of empowerment with both any child. But I think when you work with a bully or a victim of bullying, and I don't like labels, right? I've written a book called Not a Victim for that reason. But when you have children who are going through those experiences, right? If they can just learn to be empowered, and we can help empower them, we reduce the likelihood of that happening. Here's a really controversial concept for you. I don't think that we can eradicate bullying. I think it's impossible to eradicate bullying entirely. I think it's part of the human experience. I think that it's a horrible part of the human experience, but I think that we can do everything we can do to try and minimize it happening. But I think that it's almost impossible to eradicate it. What are your thoughts and views on that?
So, I mean, I'd love to say, in a perfect world, it wouldn't exist. I think we are headed toward the world where there is more awareness of it. And I think with more awareness, it gives us the power to make more of an impact and affect more change. I think the more aware we all are of our behaviors, and not necessarily just if you're displaying bullying behaviors, but all your behaviors. So kindness, and one of the things we do is proactively go into schools and workplaces, and we don't just deal reactively with people who have been bullied, but actually we work with classes, we work with workplaces, with everyone, and say, actually it's about making your workplace or making your classroom a more positive place to be. Because if we all did that, one of the things I always say to the children is, if you wanted to make a difference in the world overnight, actually all you have to do is be kind. Because if we were all kind to each other, if every single one of us was just kind, then bullying wouldn't exist. It wouldn't. There wouldn't be any. And yes, perhaps that is impractical, because as we were just saying, some of us, without even realizing, when we're under pressure or we've had a bad day, we can display bullying behaviors. But actually, if we have an awareness around them and we open up a dialogue around them, and we're prepared to speak to people and say, look, I'm really sorry. I know when I have a deadline, I can be short. I'm really sorry. I know that I've had a lot going on at home, and I'm conscious that's impacting how I'm dealing with you in the workplace. Bear with me. If we were all capable of being that little bit more self-aware and communicating more with one another, I would actually push back and say we could make a really big difference in the bullying cycle and bullying behaviour. So yes, whilst it may not be possible to completely obliterate it, I think we are headed towards a world where certainly awareness is better, and I think people are more prepared to stand up and do something about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there's so much more education around this topic, and I think that's key, right? Educating young people from a very early age is key, because it's very linked to awareness, like you said, which is then very linked to emotional intelligence and EQ. And so for me, it's like, if we want young people to be aware of bullying and the implication of their actions, then we need to raise their emotional intelligence and their self-awareness as well. But of course, that's quite tricky and takes a long time. And within that time span, which might take until they're pre-teen, they're more likely then to still continue the kind of bullying behavior, if you like, right? There are so many complex social dynamics that a young person has to deal with when they change school, or as they grow up, or when they start experiencing hormones for the first time, or when they get their first girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, that it's such a complex conversation. And even if we have the full intention of being kind, it's like sometimes our emotions rise up. And even as parents, right, you might have the full intention of nailing parenting and doing it perfectly, but then sometimes you're tired, you've worked really hard, something comes up and you don't parent to the full potential. You know that you could perform better as a parent, or even in the workplace, whatever it is, and so you slip up. I'm not saying you do anything terrible, but it can come across not kind or not as efficient as a parent. And I think that's just part of being human, right? We can ideally all be kind, but I think that's impossible. I think that we need to understand that we need to forgive ourselves when we aren't kind, and then try and have that right energy. And I think that is the right energy to push towards. So yeah, I would agree with you that it's all about educating people about their actions, raising emotional intelligence, and pushing for a kinder world is just a massive step in that direction. One of the things I wanted to ask you, based on your kind of understanding and the work you've done and all your experience, is what are the most typical mistakes that people have, or not necessarily mistakes, more the most typical misunderstandings that people have when it comes to bullying? Like, what are the things that people think about bullying that are wrong, in your opinion?
So I think one of the things we do a lot of work on, and obviously it's an area I feel strongly about, is the fact that with our children, as parents, we sort of see bullying very much, it takes place in the playground. Our children come home, and as you were saying, we don't always get it right as parents. We don't always have the time to download. We see all these things online. We should sit down. We should talk to them, but life is busy. And so if any of you out there are listening to this and thinking, I don't have the time for that, you are not alone. It is hard. It is hard to parent. So, we all need to be, as we're talking about kindness, we need to be kind to ourselves in how we are not always going to find the time to manage this. And that's why charities like Bullies Out exist, so that we can help you and support you, because it is really hard and can be quite triggering to a lot of adults, actually, when they think about bullying and hear their child has suffered bullying. But actually what we miss when we talk about bullying taking place at school is we miss that actually that now, and it didn't in our day, you see, but now that carries over into the online world. Actually, when our children are on our devices or on their phones at home, actually bullying can be taking place there as well when they are under our roofs. And so it's about perhaps speaking to parents and educating them that when we give those children those devices, it's like opening the front door to our house and asking anyone in off the street. If they are online and they are connected to the internet, then you may as well open your front door and say, well, whoever wants to come in and talk to my child, you can access them and ask them whatever you like. And so in the same way that you would put controls around that in the offline world, we need to make sure those same controls are there in the online world as well. And that we're not just almost seeing devices as TV screens. They are interactive. People can with our children on them. They're not watching TV. They are there. They are tools that other people can access your children and ask them whatever they like. And I think we just, as parents, all need to really make sure we've got a grip on what our children are doing in the online world, and that we know what they're doing, and that we're proactive around it, and that we're intrusive around it.
I think that's a really great way of looking at it. Being intrusive around it is a really good point. And I like how you said about inviting people into your living room. You wouldn't do that, right?
Exactly.
But your kids are doing it every time they pull a phone out. I love what you said about parenting as well, that it can be quite triggering. I really believe that when our children go through bullying, we relive the memories we had of bullying as well. And I love your use of the terms reactive and proactive, because this is something I just feel like I bang on about all the time, which is we need to be approaching bullying proactively, not reactively. So many parents that I speak to about bullying, they message the Warrior Academy and they ask for help and support because their child's going through bullying and they're feeling very super high emotion. But we know that when our emotions rise, our IQ drops and we're more reactive and we're less able to logically understand what's going on around us. That's part of being human. And so when we have that happen in our lives and then we try and solve the complex social situation our children are going through, we then act very reactively, and we storm into school, speak to the other parents and start with accusations, and we tell our children the wrong things to do and all this sort of stuff. Whereas if we looked at bullying very proactively, just in the same way you would prepare your child to cross the road, right? When you teach your child to cross the road, look for the zebra crossing, try and get eye contact with the driver who's coming, look left and right and so on. In this situation, that's how I see bullying, right? It's like, it's out there. It's likely going to happen. You're likely to experience it. Look for the dangers, be aware of it, have some practical strategies to dealing with it. Don't put yourself in a position where you're more likely to experience it, i.e., walking backwards across the road or walking slowly across the road or looking at your phone when you're crossing the road. You teach these practical elements to your children to avoid the danger. The best thing to do is to look for the driver's eye contact, wait for him to stop, wait for him to go, and then quickly and safely move across the road, right? And so I think there's a theory and emotional element to bullying, and then there's the practical, not a victim, i.e. body language, tone of voice, being aware, the whole digital practical side as well. And I think those two things come together to be very proactive when it comes to bullying. I'd love to, in a bit, get into some of the kind of proactive side of why or what we can do when it comes to bullying to actually protect our kids. I'd love for parents who listen to this to kind of walk away with, especially the digital side, because I know that you've done a lot of work with that, what they can do with that. But I'd also like to just conclude the kind of the emotional side of bullying, right? With a lot of the work you do, I don't suppose you speak to the parents about their previous experiences, do you? Or do you mostly focus on the child and it doesn't go too deep into the parents' lives, I'm guessing?
It varies. We deliver workshops to parents, and so we are working with parents. I think most of us, our children are our weak spot, aren't they? And so if anything is going to trigger us, it's going to be our children feeling hurt, or that someone is hurting them and we can't fix it. And that's incredibly difficult as a parent, because we want to swoop in and fix it. And actually, in bullying, as in actually lots of things in life, there is a school of thought to suggest we're not there to fix it. We're there to ride it out with them, to listen to them, to empower them, to have conversations with them around it. As you were saying, perhaps to, have we had conversations with our children about what makes a good friendship? Because, the stereotype of bullying might be somebody pushing and shoving our kid, but actually a lot of bullying takes place within friendship groups. And, it's that emotional bullying that can be quite covert and quite difficult to spot. So have we sat and had a discussion with our children around what does a good friendship feel like to you? What does your friend Seb bring to your day? You know, what word sums up how he makes you feel about yourself when you spend time with him? And you having those conversations, opening up that dialogue as the norm to have with your child, to make them think about these things and educate them about how people make them feel about themselves, so that they can draw out for themselves what's good and what's bad, and recognize what's healthy for them and what's toxic, without us having to fix it for them, for want of a better word. You know, they're doing it for themselves, and then as they grow up, they've got that self-confidence and that belief that actually they can sort this for themselves. And I guess it comes back to that sort of concept of, you know, the likability. You know, are you likable because you make people feel good about themselves and because you display, you know, a strong value set, or are you likable because you have status? And you know, that's quite different, isn't it? That's about power, that's about control, and it's about helping your children to recognize not just which of those they want for themselves, and who they want to surround themselves with, but actually, you know, helping them to identify if they are displaying some of those that might come under the status or aspiring to have status, because again, those are those ones that might creep into bullying behaviors. So I think it's about, yes, sort of sitting by their side, helping them along on their journey, and so that they know you're there for them if they need you, and that they can talk to you. But I think as a lot of parents, we want to fix it, or we refer to our previous experiences, and you know, we try and suggest what would have worked for us, and they're not us. They are living their own experience, completely separate to anything we may have experienced. And you know, most children, if you ask them, they will say, I didn't want them to fix it when I told them. I didn't want them to be ashamed of me. I didn't want to be embarrassed when I told them. I just wanted to feel that I wasn't alone. And so as parents, I think that's what we can do for them. We can just let them know they're not alone.
Just a quick shout out to the guys at Shield who manage this podcast, come up with the strategy behind the podcast, help me schedule interviews, as well as do all of the editing and the producing of the podcast. Without them, we wouldn't be able to produce this podcast. If you would like to create your own podcast, I can't recommend the Shield team enough. They have done well over 100 episodes for me over the last few years, and I've been so pleased with the results. So have a look in the description of this video or the podcast episode, and you'll see how to get in touch with them yourself. I think that's brilliant advice. And I love what you said about courage earlier as well. I think the way I see bullying is that it's never just the child going through it alone. It's the whole family, right? When a child goes through bullying, often it starts off with this breakdown in communication, which then impacts the relationships with the parents, and then the parents get involved, and then the parents feel triggered because they've been through it before, and they start trying to mentor the child. And so you're in this situation where the whole family is there's a ripple effect, and it can be quite devastating. I also think that parenting really is this balance between empowerment and protection. And I love what you said about we try and fix the bullying for our children, but ultimately we can't do that, right? So when I wrote the book, Not a Victim, the whole process there was empowering young people to overcome bullying on their own. That's such a difficult pill to swallow. And I used to stand up and deliver workshops across the UK and Dubai on bullying. And I realized I was doing it wrong initially, because I was basically standing up and giving what I would call black belt content out to kind of yellow belts, right, on the subject of bullying. And it was stuff like, the first thing we need to do is have perspective here. We need to forgive the child's bully because they're not a bad person. You imagine telling that to 50 upset mums and dads. I realized quite quickly that it wasn't the best way to do it was to start off with some practical advice, and then we start to understand the perception piece comes in. But teaching young people, if you look at the perception, teaching young people to see where bullying comes from, and that it's this flow of negative energy is really powerful, because it takes fear and intimidation away and replaces it with empathy and understanding. And I once had a 9-year-old student that I was mentoring through bullying, and it was chronic bullying. They moved schools, it continued. They moved schools, it continued. Classic example of the parent trying to fix the bullying for the child, right? That's the protective energy versus the empowering energy. So I came in with the empowering energy, teaching them to understand why it came from, why it happened, understand the perspective, understand the bully's not a bad person, understand the things that would empower them. And they eventually walked into school, saw the bully for who they really were and what they were going through, and actually mentored the bullies through the bullying. You know, they said to the bully, "Is everything okay? Are you all right?" And the bully then, you know, eventually they became friends, and it was this humbling experience where, you know, where you suddenly realize these are just two kids, and you know, they're just going through two different things. And one of the reasons that that child was experiencing chronic bullying was because the focus of the parents was on protection versus empowerment, trying to fix the bullying for themselves. And once you spot that, it's really, it's like we need to mentor the parents, not the kids, right? If we mentor the parents, suddenly incredible things happen. So yeah, empowerment and protection, that kind of balance, somewhere in the middle, there's a sweet spot, right? And you can over empower, you know, like I see a lot of dads doing this actually. You know, they want to. It's kind of the masculine and feminine energy. I kind of think is strong, kind of empowering force. So that could be male or female. And then you've got someone who's the kind of nurturing force. And there's typically in a relationship at home, you've got a balance of these two forces, right? And there's too much empowering force. It's like throw them the deep end, they'll be okay. Well, now they hate swimming, right? And they don't want to do it again. If there's too much protection, it's like they're going to wear armbands till they're 40. Do you know what I mean? So it's this kind of. And I guess that's the kind of the beautiful concept of the masculine and feminine energy working together to produce the perfect result, depending on how deep you want to look at it.
But actually, we see in the, you know, when you were talking about children, I think there's so much more we can do with the younger ones, because actually that's where, you know, they're this sort of, when we talk about, you know, the likability, that the status that doesn't exist for them. So at their age, and they are innocent enough that if someone is mean to them and you say, because you're right, you know, to a lot of teenagers, if I was to stand up and say, if someone's bullying you, be kind to them, they're not there. They're not receptive to that. That's too much for them. They're like, well, what? But actually, if I was to say that to some 6 and 7 year olds, they're all right with that. They see that. They think,
there's a right time. There's a right time for the right advice, right? The advice needs to be age specific, definitely.
But yes, they get it. I think their brains are, and their hearts are innocent enough that they can say, okay, so you're telling me this person's been mean to me because they're a bit sad. I want to make them happy. I can do that by saying, do you want to come and play with us? And it's there. And if we could embed it at that age, actually, we probably could negate quite a lot of it going forwards.
Do you think bullying differs between girls and boys?
So probably stereotypically, people would say it does. I think that it depends on, probably less on the genders and more. So, for example, in the behaviors might differ. So, for example, in a school playing field, if you are all involved in some form of sporting activity, the bullying behaviors you see in the sporting activity might differ to if you are walking around as a group, talking, gossiping. So depending on the activity you're taking place in face-to-face environment, the bullying behaviors might differ. In the online world, again, it depends on the apps you're using. So, for example, not gender specific, but if you are gaming, then you're going to encounter one type of bullying behavior. If you are using things like Instagram or Snapchat, you might encounter a different type of bullying behavior. So I would say it depends more on what you're accessing or what you're doing as to the kind of behavior you might encounter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's certainly with the online world, right? It's more one size fits all in terms of how boys and girls kind of approach it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas in person, I think that boys tend to, what do they say here? There's a stat here I've got from National Center of Educational Statistics, 2019. A higher percentage of male than of female students report being bullied physically. So 6% versus 4%. Whereas they say a higher percentage of females report being the subjects of rumors, 18% versus 9%. So that's interesting, isn't it? I don't know what age group that would be, but I'm guessing under sort of preteen age. So it's interesting. There's almost like a 20% more likelihood of being bullied physically if you're a boy, and then the bullying is kind of 18 to 19, 18% rumors for females versus 9% for boys. So the approach seems different, right? When it comes to in person versus online, of course.
So I guess first of all, my sort of pushback against statistics is always where bullying is concerned, statistics are only as good as the people reporting to us. And I think what I would probably say is girls might be more likely to disclose bullying behaviour than boys.
Really good point.
Secondly, I guess those statistics almost tie in with what I was just saying around the activities. So the physical, so say boys are more likely statistically to play football in the school.
Yeah.
Then the physical bullying is probably more likely to play out in that context. If it is more likely to be girls walking around chatting at lunchtime rather than engaging in a sporting activity, then quite, you can see why rumors, gossiping, talking about each other behind their backs, that would be the more common behavior that would display itself. So they sort of tie in with what I was saying, but
the context of where it would be is basically where they spend their time is where they would spend their bullying time too, right?
Yeah. But I do think statistics are really tricky when it comes to bullying, because it is something that so many of us don't feel comfortable to tell anyone about. And actually that's the most worrying part, isn't it? If someone is suffering with bullying and they aren't telling anyone, it will be displaying itself. So you might, be sat at home as a parent, seeing your child suddenly has become very introverted or very extroverted or very angry or very withdrawn, or suddenly never wants to be off their phone or their device, or the opposite, or you're seeing something disrupted with their eating, but actually it's very difficult. It's easier for parents because we're at home and we just have our children. But if you think in a classroom and a teacher has 30 children,
and
the child starts to play up, it's very difficult to find the time to look underneath that and actually, well, why are they suddenly acting differently? What's the root cause of that? Because so many don't disclose they're being bullied. And so, yes, those statistics are helpful, but I would say they don't always give us the full story about what's happening, because so many don't disclose.
I'd certainly agree with that. I think there's a huge number of young people who don't want to talk about bullying. I think that they feel a level of shame and guilt associated with it. My hunch is that young boys don't necessarily want to tell their dads or their mums that they're going through bullying in particular, and because they want to live up to a stronger image. So I think there's an element there. Would you agree with that?
And I also think it's hard because, none of us are perfect, but sometimes, unfortunately, we might, if we're caught off guard and we're not ready for something, we might say something that maybe was said to us as children, something like, so and so is being mean to me because I'm doing such and such. Well, then stop doing it. Stop doing whatever it is. You're clearly annoying them. Just stop doing it.
Yeah.
Or so and so's leaving me out and they won't let me play. Well, go and play with someone else. Just don't, go and play somewhere else. Don't play with them if they're being mean to you. And all that does is it pushes it back onto the child, doesn't it? And they think, well, it must be me then, because even my parents, when I've told them, they're saying, well, change your behavior, do something differently. So it's me, isn't it? I'm the problem. And it's really hard to get them to open up to us when, we might feel like we're trying to help, and then, if you follow that through, if you say, well, do this or do that, and again, we're just trying to fix it. We're just trying to empower them. We're trying to do the right thing. But we give them all this advice and we say this. Next time they do something, you say this to them. And they go into school and they don't say it. They don't want to come home and tell you, because then they think, oh, I've let them down as well. So sometimes when we are trying to help them and fix it, and sometimes what we're doing really is sort of pushing them away a little bit and making it even harder for them to come to us. And that's why sometimes it's easier just not easier, it can be significantly harder to just sit and support them and listen to them and almost say, I can't fix this for you, but you can tell me whatever you like, and I will support you, and we can work on, as you were saying, we can work on strategies, we can do some research on it, we can suggest other activities that you can go and get involved in that might offer you new friendships and expose you to new people. But it's not trying to fix the problem for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things you spoke about there was, parents noticing some of the changes at home to get insights into whether their child's being bullied or not. One of the things I said earlier was that the first thing that I see happen is this breakdown of communication, right? So that the child won't necessarily, even if you think you've got an amazing relationship with them, and that's one of the key things, they won't necessarily tell you they're going through bullying. And so I think as parents, we need to become experts in understanding slight nuances, slight changes in their behavior, at home, which could allude to the fact that things are going on in their environment outside of the one that we see them in. And one of those things as well is obviously they could be bullied while they're right in front of you. So your child could be in front of you on their phone being bullied. You wouldn't know about it and they don't want to tell you. And so one of the things I say to parents around that is, when you give your child access, especially when the younger kids, right, and preteens, and if you give your child access to the internet, treat it a bit like you're sending them off to a community or something, right, to the park or to the school or whatever it is, and try to analyze their emotional state before and afterwards. So you send them off. How do they feel when you send them off? They're probably excited to go on their phone, or they've got their 45-minute slot from whatever, right? They're allowed to use it now. Once they're in that position, okay, they're excited. What's that kind of state afterwards? Do you know what I mean? How do you measure that? How do you look at that? Are they, there's one little boy right now. Come back from a school run. I can get him to join us, actually. He might be able to, he'll give some interesting answers, that's for sure. And how do you measure their kind of emotional state afterwards? Are you aware of that? Are you aware of how their state changes? I think that's really key, because people say, well, they know if they go to the football club, they come home and they're upset. If they go to school, they come home and they're upset. But they don't then measure the online space. What are your thoughts around that?
So we always say at Bullies Out, look at it as their online time like it's an extracurricular activity. So in the same way that you would ask them, how did netball go? How did art club go? How did music club go? Ask them how their time online went. Who did they play with? If they were gaming, who were they playing against? And if they are online, there is no judgment. We all have to make our own choices as parents. If your children are gaming and they're online, then talk to them about it. Who do they play with? Look for the differences, because you'd notice if they suddenly started walking home from school with 3 different children, you'd notice that. So if you ask them who they are gaming with, sit with them. Look, watch them on there, but as painful as it might be, make them do it in the main room, so that you've actually got access to who they are talking to, and you can hear the conversations if they are talking to people. But build it in as part of their lifestyle, because sometimes what we do is we don't understand the online world as parents, so we just pull back from it. But treat it as an extracurricular activity. And the other thing we always say is always build in a safe space around the online world. And that will look different depending on your family makeup. So for some people, it might be that you say, right, no phones in bedrooms, because their bedroom is their safe space. So no matter what is happening, no matter what is going on in that online world, that phone goes down, that device goes down, and no one can access them when they're in their bedroom. So they are safe. And even if they don't want to be safe, you're keeping them safe. That
is something parents could learn from as well, right? You imagine parents who also have a difficult time online, or they find themselves commenting on things they shouldn't be commenting on, and they get a troll chasing them, and it's like, well, sometimes you just need a break from it, right? And I think that safe space being the bedroom is very logical.
But for some people, that doesn't work. And, that's why it's important. We were saying about, making it accessible for children. We have to make what we're doing accessible for parents too. So I might say to some people, they say, oh, I can never do that, because they're always on their phone in their bedroom. So maybe then you have to do it differently. And you say, okay, well, then it's no, you can have your phone whenever you like in the house, but it's no devices after 8 o'clock at night. Or it's no devices whilst we eat. Or it will look different to every household. And your children may not be delighted that you're building it in.
I'm sure for a lot of teens, that would be a tricky one, yeah. Tricky negotiation.
It will pay off, because what you're doing is you are showing them, no matter how they feel about it, there will be a time in their day when no one can access them and they are safe. because the world's changed. It used to be they came home from school, they shut that door, and you could keep them safe while they were in your house. And we can't anymore because they are online. And the answer isn't to just say, well, you can't have a phone and you can't be online, because that's not practicable either. So we have to work with them, and we have to, that's why, we are here to help. We have to help people make that a positive experience and make it work and keep them safe.
So that transition from your child not being online to being online, that's a really interesting question that we get asked a lot as well. What do you think is the right age to allow a child to be online or to have a phone? I saw an interesting quote the other day, which was something along the lines of, give your child a phone when you're ready for them to not be a child anymore. It was something like that. Now, obviously, that's quite an extreme opinion, right? It was like, well, as soon as you give your child a phone, they're becoming an adult. It's like, that is the beginning of that transition. But I also think that maybe there's an element there of, there's a difference between giving and letting a child borrow. Like, giving a child a phone means they've got a phone in their pocket they can access whenever they want. Whereas my approach, my kids are only 3 and 6, but my approach would be, as they get older and they notice all their friends around them start using phones more and more, the way I would see it is, I would let them borrow my phone or a phone I've got at the house, right? And so they're on that transition slowly, rather than bang, you've now got a phone, which I think a lot of parents do. What are your thoughts on that? How do you manage that transition from offline to online for young people? And how would you advise parents to deal with that? And so when should they give their child a phone? When should they give them social media access?
So I feel quite strongly around this, because I think, as you've just said, there's lots of quotes out there, there's lots of helpful advice. And the problem is, as we have just been saying, everyone is different. And I think it can feel quite isolating if you are a parent who has chosen to give your child a phone, and then you read all this really helpful advice and these quotes saying, this is what you've done, and you can't take it back, can you? Because you've already done that. You've made that choice. And actually then you feel very isolated and very excluded by all of us saying, oh, well, you should wait till they're X age. Or so my personal opinion on when my children should have devices actually is completely irrelevant, because what matters is what works for you as a family. And I think what's important is for anti-bullying charities like Bullies Out, for people like me, for people like you, is that we are accessible and approachable to people. And if you have made the decision to give your child a phone when they are, 6, 7, I would still want you to feel you could come to us and approach us and ask our advice about how to make it safer, or to, lock it down, or to change what you've done with it. But what I sometimes feel is that we isolate a lot of people and make them feel judged because they might have made a decision. If we were all to say, oh, we think X age is the appropriate age, anyone who's done it before that feels judged, and that straight away isolates them.
That's classic parenting advice in general, isn't it? Like, I see parenting a bit like being a martial artist, in that it's a journey of self-discovery, and it's very easy for people to criticize until they're actually in the arena and they've got a toddler screaming at them. I've never let a toddler use an iPad, or and as soon as they've got a toddler, bang, there's an iPad, right? You see it all the time. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines. But I would totally agree with you that element of shame or guilt that a parent could experience because they're reading advice that is so hardcore on, you've done this wrong or that wrong.
And it's so extreme. People have such strong opinions around it. But I guess what I would say is, if you are considering getting your child a device or a phone at whatever age they are, there is no judgment, and there is only support. And so, there are lots of, I think, practical things we can look at doing to make our devices safer. I would say any app that your child has access to, I would say you should also have access to, because you need to know what they're doing, and you need, if you can be on it with them, so on their Instagram, or gaming with them, then all the better, because you can see what they're doing. But if your child is talking about things like Roblox, or Be Real, or Snapchat, and you don't know what these are, I would say that is the cause for concern for me. You need to be on these apps with them, and you need to have an idea, who are their friends, check their privacy settings, because more often than not, you will think but actually when you now go away and take a look, it won't be what you think. So yes, those are the sorts of things I'd be saying is it's about, if you've given them a device and you've made that choice, it's about being intrusive around their use of it. Remember, it is interactive. Treat it the same way you would treat it if you were to open your front door and say anyone off the street could come into your house and talk to your child. What kind of controls and safety measures would you put up around that interaction? Yeah. Use that same analogy and put those same controls and safety measures in place around their online activity as well.
Brilliant advice. Be intrusive. I love that as a term as well. I think it's a great way of looking at it. While we've been talking, I've been writing down what I think would be the sort of 5 tips that parents could walk away from after listening to us just chat here. The first thing I've written down is treat online time like an ECA. So measure your child's response to their state before and after, and observe how they feel before and after that activity, treating it like a separate activity they're going to, right? The next one I've got down here is build a safe space. Well, that could be a safe time. So no phones in bedrooms as an example, or no phones after 8 p.m., whatever it is. The next one I've got down here is when, obviously, to the question, when is the right time to give a child a phone? And the answer there is no right time. It's based on the family, but have a careful transition, I think, is obviously very important. And number 4 I've got down is be intrusive, which I love. I think that's a great one. And have any access to any apps they've got access to. If you had to come up with one more piece of advice that you think would conclude those 5 tips quite nicely for parents, what would you suggest?
I would say speak to someone and seek support or seek advice. We are all out there, wanting to help. So don't try and fix this on your own. And that is what we're here for. So use that experience that's there, use that support that's there, because I think as much as it can feel very, very hard and isolating for the child, it is an extremely lonely place to be as a parent, an extremely vulnerable place to be as a parent. And again, as we were talking about earlier on in the podcast, that's when we go in on ourselves and don't want to reach out. So I would say push through that barrier and reach out and say, I need some help here. Can someone help me? Because it's there, and you will straight away, it will feel a little bit less lonely, a little bit less intense, because you'll have support around you, and you, just like your child, will realize you're not alone.
Brilliant stuff, Lucy. Speaking of asking help and seeking help, just to conclude now, where can people go to find help within your organization and to get help from you guys? Where's the best place for us to send people if they would like that online support?
So our website, www.bulliesout.com, is it has loads of free downloads and resources on it, but it also has access. So you can book. So proactively, we deliver across the world workshops to both parents, and that's around online safety. It's around understanding and exploring bullying behaviour. We do the same for schools. We do the same for workplaces. We go in and do positive behaviour in the workplace. So we very look proactively. We take an approach of helping people, but then reactively, if you are listening to this and thinking, actually, myself or my child just needs a bit of support because they are suffering with bullying at the moment, we have an e-mentoring and counselling service that is all accessible online. The counselling is 6 funded sessions. The e-mentoring is free and it's confidential. So it's there, it's accessible, and as I was saying, it's there to support people through. So please make use of it. You can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram. So please come along and join us. But if you are struggling, drop us an email, contact us. We'll be able to help.
Amazing stuff, Lucy. That was such an insightful conversation. Really, really, I love so many of your points there, and I think the work you're doing is super important. So thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I really hope you enjoyed today's Warrior Academy podcast episode. We're going to keep creating these episodes because I know that so many parents find them useful or get insights or get ideas about how to develop their child's character. But it all comes down to the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, and concentration. So if you want to get a deep insight into the levels of confidence your child has, the level of concentration they have, or the level of conduct they have, so that you can actually put a score next to it and then work towards increasing those scores like we do in the Warrior Academy, then I'd love to invite you to fill in the breakthrough area assessment. It takes about 5 minutes of your time, and you will get a personalized PDF report on your child's 3 C's. To access the breakthrough area assessment and find out your child's 3 C's score, all you need to do is go to www.breakthrougharea.com.